Tēnā rā tātou katoa, and welcome along to Kia Puawai, our Māori in Business Speaker Series. It's my pleasure to welcome you along this morning to this morning's webinar. Ko rangi puta te manga, ko piha te awa, ko mai tako papa, ko Sue toko mama, ko Melissa Frerk toko ingoa. I'm Melissa Frerk, your business training manager, and as I said, it's my pleasure to welcome you along to the webinar this morning. I will go through some housekeeping, but before I do, I will turn off my camera for the purposes of the webinar to go through this. So just our important information for you today. The webinar has got some great information for you throughout the morning, but it is not in place of any personalized advice for you or your business. If this is something that you are interested in, you can drop it in the chat in the region that you're in, and we can get one of the local relationship managers to touch base with you after today to send it through. At this point, I'd love to hand over to Carleen to do our official welcome. Thank you, Carleen.
Tēnā rā koutou katoa. Nau mai, whakatau mai rā. Tākiri rangi, tākiri anuku, tākiri tawatia kia Puawai ke tāo te kare aroto e. E mihi nui rawa atu kia koutou mai te pēke nui o ANZ. Kia koutou, nau mai, whakatau mai rā, ki tēnei anō te kōrero o te rānei, I roto I tēnei anō kia Puawai te Pāki. Ko te kai o te rangatira he kōrero. I roto I tēnā, kia koutou e wakarongo mai ana, kia koutou e titiro mai ana, a hako no hea, a hako kōwai, hara mai, hara mai, hara mai. E mihi tēnei anō ahau, e kia Ngāti Raukawa rākei. E no anau I te taha o te awa tūpuna, o te wai te mata. E mihi kawana ki te awa tūpuna. Me ngā maunga whakahi a tēnā koutou katoa. I roto I tēnei anō o taku mihi, ko mihi atu kia rātou, koronga atu ki te karango iwha. Au e rā, hoki wairua e, haere mai, haere. Rātou kia rātou, tātou ngā kānohi ora kia tātou, a tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome. In the words of our te reo Māori, he mihi tēnei kia koutou. Nau mai, whakatau mai rā. Back to you, Melissa.
Thank you, beautiful Carleen. So just to let you know who our speakers are today, now they'll all do their official introductions shortly as they hand over, but Toni Kerr for our Head of Māori Business Projects and Strategic Relationships at WellingtonNZ. It's a real honour to hear from her today, and I'm sure you'll take a lot away from it. David Harrison, Head of Māori Relationships here at ANZ. You've just seen the beautiful Carleen Everett for a Head of our Kōrero Māori Strategy here at ANZ. And as I introduced myself, I'm Melissa Frerk, one of our business training managers. And it's my great honour and privilege to hand you over to Toni to introduce herself. Thank you, Toni.
Tēnā koutou. Kanui te mihi kia koutou e Carleen mō tērā mihi mahana. Ki ngā kaitiaki o kaupapa tuku iho, e rauranga tērā mā, kua tai mai nei I tēnei kōrero, kanui te mihi kia koutou. Ko Ngāti Tūwharetoa, ko Ngāti Raukawa ki te Tonga ngā iwi, no tokarangi ahau, ko te tikanga te marae, ko Piko Ngāti Raukawa ko Glenis Manastra o Kumātua, ko Toni Kerr toko ingoa, nā reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. I'm really excited, a little bit nervous to be here today because this topic of governance, particularly in the Māori context, is interesting and perplexing. And one of the things that I've been thinking about when preparing for this kōrero, because of the breadth of the topic, is how do we make the most of the hour that we have together. We really need to think about why we need good governance. There's a lot that's been going on in this space, and really when we want to think about what we can achieve by governing well, what happens when things don't work so well. And certainly one of the things that's been interesting about, certainly for small businesses, is when is the right time to review the governance structure. what I thought I'd do is just provide a little bit of context about my own personal haringa, because it has been a continuous journey, really starting back from 2008. I spent a lot of time offshore. I came back to Aotearoa in 2008, and I went to a hui where a motivational speaker there talked about when you have an ability, you have a responsibility. And that really connected with me. I had spent so much time away. And so coming back to Aotearoa was really about what was I going to do to reconnect. And that wero, when I think about it, it really wanted me to understand, with the capacity that I had or the capability that I had, how might I start that journey. The first thing that I did was I went to the Ministry of Women and registered with them. I was very fortunate that it was all about timing and alignment, and a position came up for a Crown financial institution, a fund, and because of my banking and investment background, I was very fortunate to get a role there, and that was a tremendous experience, and I don't take it for granted, because many people who have been trying to get into the governance space, often find challenges as how they access that. So I guess I was very fortunate. The team, the management team there, all of the chairs, I was there for 6 years. The chairs, my fellow board directors, were wonderful, and it was a really, really fantastic experience. But what I realised is that I wanted to do something more, and I often use the phrase, doing mahi that matters. And I started thinking about how could I be more connected with our community. So I explored some roles, and I ended up working alongside in the disability sector. I had a governance role, and I also had a role in the social housing sector. But the thing that was, I suppose, the greatest catalyst in reframing that governance haringa was when 8 years ago, our beloved father, who I think the next slide will show, is our father passed away. And it's really where my connection, or actually our whānau's connection to our haukainga, to Te Ao Māori, was reactivated. And so in the slide there, you see Te Tikanga ki Tokarangi, our marae, and you see one of our beloved aunties. And I always use the auntie sense check, because it was our auntie who put my name forward to be the deputy chair of our marae. And that really, even though I had another governance role which I had chosen, there's something very compelling about being chosen by your whānau. And so with that really came a deep sense of I wanted to do, how could I be the very best that I wanted to be? So I'm still on that journey, but that discovery of what good governance looks like is really a lifelong pursuit. And one of the things I think it's really important to reflect on also, that critical decision to move into governance, because it's not just the responsibility, but you end up assuming personal liability. And so one of the first things that I had to do is to sit down with my husband and talk about what it was, the risks that potentially could arise, and just to get comfortable with that. The other thing that was really important is around capacity. And I know particularly, and I reflect on my whānau and so many of our whānau who devote such a lot of their time. And so capacity to actually make the time and take the time in your governance roles is really critical. So I've always been very careful about thinking about, did I have the capacity to take on the roles? And early on, I started with just the one role. At the moment, I have 2 current roles and an advisory role along with my day job, but I'm very careful and cautious about how I manage that. And it has meant that I have had to step away from some of those roles. I definitely have had a gentle prod from some of my friends and perhaps my husband, because it does take up a lot of your time, more often than not weekends. So just going to take you to the next slide, which is really around that question, and it can be a headache, why we need good governance. And I thought it was important to set the scene, because what I have found, certainly coming back in 2008, when I had very little appreciation of the highly complex Māori economy, is the system within, or the ecosystem within which we operate. It is extremely complex. It is not well understood. Certainly, I didn't understand it that well. So when I think of the Māori economy, so based on 2018 figures, that was around $69 billion. But what few people appreciate, unless you go looking, is that that ecosystem spans, small micro enterprise, cottage type industry. We have Pakihi Māori, so small to medium-sized enterprises, kaupapa Māori. We have under Te Ture Whenua, trusts and incorporations, and of course we have PSGE, GEs and iwi. And that complexity, whilst also not well understood, I think gives us as Māori a frame of reference around wanting to understand what good governance looks like, because structurally, legislatively and culturally, we're accustomed to governance structures. So in the last 5 years, I moved away from the banking and investment profession as a day job. I still have some board roles in that space, but I moved to Te Puni Kōkiri in 2018, and after that I did a piece of work at Te Putia Matua at the Reserve Bank, and I had never worked for the Crown. My role now is with Wellington, New Zealand as essentially council, and I've been struck by the number of conversations I've heard that talk about Māori organisations and the need for them to uplift their governance capability. And when I think about that, I actually know, because of the complexity, it's a little bit unfair. It's rather simplistic, and definitely someone who has worked for large organisations, banks being an obvious example. We're very accustomed to having different structures, having a clear separation between the executive and the board. But for those of you online who have your own businesses, with a small firm, it doesn't necessarily make sense to necessarily have that segregation in the form of a separate board straight away. And I have been hugely fortunate in my roles since I joined Te Puni Kōkiri to meet many Māori businesses, kaupapa Māori businesses, and understand some of the challenges they face. And I often describe SMEs generally as the engine room of our economy. Many probably would agree. And yet when it comes to those organisations, they may have less than 10 staff. They may well understand, risk management. I mean, some of them have probably secured their businesses through loans, for example, or through their homes as collateral. They've got vision, passion, they've got amazing teams, they've got drive. But the one consistent theme that I've continued to hear from many whānau who have businesses is just their being time poor. And I also think about marae and other community-based organisations who are doing their absolute level best to make the most of a situation where, more often than not, they rely on mahi aroha, so voluntary work, and they also have very little putia, very little money, and it's really hard trying to find someone to help. And for different reasons, for those different types of organisations, these can become real disadvantages, because what more often happens than not is that they don't get themselves out of the operation, so they can't really get out their heads out of the day to day to get into that big strategic thinking, or as one of my colleagues mentioned to me today, having that helicopter view. And so what I'm kind of wanting to think about is, in a simple way, is what's a good way to think about good governance in practice. And one of the questions I ask myself is, what do we need to do to get our whare, our house, in order? And governance in this context, in very simple terms, is actually having all the information you need at your fingertips to be able to attract investment, to be able to access funding. But in order to do that, and I don't want to make light of it, because it sounds easier than it really, really is, you need to be able to convince someone that you are worth investing in. That means being able to produce a whole host of things. So in the governance context, there'll be an expectation that you have policies, and those policies will, of course, vary depending on your business, but they will include things like conflict of interest, which is a critical governance consideration. It will include, increasingly, health and safety. It could well include sustainability. They'll expect you to be able to produce minutes to reflect some key decisions or strategic documents. Risk registers are certainly a common occurrence. So without these things, you'll be pretty much wanting someone to trust in you. And that realistically won't happen because they'll need time to get through that, and that may well mean that there's a missed opportunity. So the red flag there in the slide is really just to illustrate that the absence of any of these things, if you don't have them readily available, it makes it harder for anyone to decide whether they want to invest in you and put in the effort. And so in many respects, good governance gives you the breathing space to just be able to get these things done. So the next slide is really about what do we actually achieve by doing governance well. There are a lot of benefits, and I'm going to cover a few of those off with you. One of the things so the IOD, you know, there are many organisations out there with governance, how would I describe it? Governance principles. There are the 4 pillars, but I think most would agree that having an organisation having a clear sense of purpose and vision and a clear pathway forward is a critical place, because basically everyone can come together with a shared goal to move towards. And it's that alignment of purpose and vision that really sets the tone for a high performing culture, and that can help the organisation thrive and grow. And it's actually on this tone setting that I just wanted to explore a little bit, because again, I have been incredibly privileged to sit alongside some amazing governors, and governors who I learnt from, who I observe. And I wanted to mihi in particular to 2 wahine tō and chairs. The first is Rachel Selby, who's the chair of our Raukawa Kete Tonga Charitable Trust. That's the parent entity. And Debbie Birch, who's the chair of the asset holding company of the board that I'm on, Raukawa Kete Tonga AHC. And the reason I wanted to mihi and call out these 2 amazing women, not least of which is because both have made a tireless commitment to service and to excellence. But the thing that I've observed that sets them apart, aside of having no ego, it seems, is their ability to hold up the mana of others and really role model to get the best from the boards that they chair, and to role model what healthy relationships can look like between related entities. Unfortunately, I've also seen situations where that hasn't worked well, and it has resulted in governors leaving, which really is a great tragedy, because without that, the organisation's governance may well suffer, and the organisation may not achieve its purpose. So I definitely see a key benefit of good governance is that ability to attract and retain good governors. Another key benefit of good governance is simply having good processes, policies, and practice. And why is that important? It just helps you keep ahead of the game. It helps you prepare for emerging risks. It keeps you resilient. And going back to that, if someone's interested in your business, if they want to invest, they will want to do due diligence. So for those of you who have ever tried to go out and raise capital, I mean, due diligence is really a process where they are wanting to do a deep dive into everything. I mean, obviously there's a valuation part to that, valuing your business. They'll want to understand the organisational structures. They'll want to see audited accounts. They'll want to see your policies. So the benefit of good governance is that all of those things should be at your fingertips. And without it, as I said, you'll need to spend considerable amount of time and effort in getting those ready, which may well lead to you missing out on opportunities. Another benefit, and I've been, again, fortunate to be working alongside some amazing governors, and just that ability to share the load, being able to lean on other governors, being able to learn from other governors, the fresh thinking that comes in when someone new joins the board. I've seen wonderful examples around this happening on some of the boards I'm on, and it's really helped us to recalibrate our strategic focus, and in some cases reconnect with our purpose. So definitely there's some real benefits in doing governance well. And so what happens when governance doesn't go well? So I can't stress enough how important it is to be disciplined. I mean, discipline is a key part of what we need to do, because that discipline allows us to make the time so that we regularly discuss these issues that ordinarily, when we're time poor, we just leave to the side for another rainy day. And we also need to recognise it's an investment. It's there to help, and it's not a hindrance. And given all the uncertainty we've faced, it's also just good management practice to make sure that what we've got is fit for purpose and actually fit for the journey ahead. Without this discipline, we know that sometimes businesses just get stuck on those operational matters, unable to see what's around the corner and unprepared to those things that come around. And I have seen quite a few things that can go wrong. I've known a few businesses who faced major issues due to the loss of a founder or a business partner, whether it was a dispute or, sadly, in the case of the loss of a partner. And during these difficult times, having good governance in place and succession plans has, in some cases, been the lifeline that helped these organisations stay on track. In a couple of cases, I know that they used the idea of advisors or advisory board to great effect, and it really helped them to prepare for the next steps. In other cases, succession plans were already in place, and it was just a matter of activating those plans. And these are really important lessons. Excuse me. Because what it shows is that rather than being unprepared, taking the time to sit down and to have had those strategic conversations is truly well spent. But these are obviously extreme examples, and there are other ones that I've experienced that are they're just they're just annoying because of the amount of time and effort that we consume. And the example I'm going to reflect on is one that Carleen and I spoke about. It's around the banking process. So in the context of a marae, I was involved as a trustee. We decided to kick off an annual general meeting process because we had only one active trustee at the time. Our governance wasn't working well. And that triggered a whole range of things in order to strengthen our governance. But one of them was we needed to obviously go up and add new signatories to a bank account. Unfortunately, when we went to the bank, what we realised is that the legal entity was not the right legal entity, and some of you will no doubt be aware of the anti-money laundering process, which makes things much longer and more complicated. So it took us a tremendous amount of time. That other issue around just a simple thing, not having the right legal entity, also had implications for the IOD, and I spent a year trying to resolve that issue. The IRD absolutely did a fantastic job, but these are all the things that, as part of good governance, could have been avoided. I'm pleased to say that the governance structure there, and that's Hawariki Marae, is working really well. I have stepped away as trustee, but remain the treasurer there. And we're pretty confident that we now have all the policies and things in place that if we needed to go out and access funding, we could. So while all of these things are entirely manageable and avoidable, we need to set aside the time. But it also begs the question, when is the right time to move to a more formal structure? And so the next slide is really that visualization of, when is the right time to move from informal to formal. So we've already established why governance makes sense. And if you're already having, as a business, you're already having those regular dedicated discussions focusing on those strategic things, then, you would expect that part of that you're reviewing your strategy, your performance, you'll be noticing if there's any significant change in the business. And that's when you absolutely need to take a closer look. So when I think of a formal structure, I mean, it is the idea of having a board of trustees or directors that are separate from the operational matters. And really, I was exploring, what does that expression mean, having a seat at the table? But part of that is it really does matter. It really does depend on whether it's an advisory capacity, which can work very well, or whether it's a decision-making capacity. I've actually been involved in both types of arrangements. And definitely when you have a right to vote and you have far more influence. But there are different choices. And so fundamentally understanding what your needs are is going to be part of that conversation. But for Pakihi Māori or Māori businesses out there, I think a key question is going to be, ko wai ngā tangata hou? So who are these newcomers? Who do we need? What skills do we already have? What do we need? And really importantly, and I can't underscore this enough, is how can we make sure that the newcomers that we bring into our organisation have the same values that we do? And in this sense, I think of an organisation as a taonga, and the minute we bring in new people, we need to really think about how we're going to protect that taonga, what kinds of arrangements we need. And so practically what that might look like is if we have a new equity partner, at that point we'll probably be thinking about what to include in a shareholders agreement, how the voting rights are allocated, what type of governance is appropriate. It may well be suitable to have a number of subcommittees, remuneration committees, audit and risk committees. So there's a whole range of considerations that go alongside bringing in newcomers. The other catalyst for thinking about a formalisation of a structure is the organisation's size and scale. Because when we have a growing number of whānau working with us that we need to take care of, it may well make sense to bring in some executives who have the specialised skills to manage this. And it's also in this context that I think of tikanga. Now I went to hear Te Wānanga o Aotearoa back in 2015, and really that discovery of tikanga was an eye-opener and fascinating to me, because tikanga provides a frame of reference of thinking about things that are important. And when we think about governance, governance can change. And so, as you know, tikanga is adaptable. It changes when things are no longer serving the intention or serving the purpose intended. It's an incredibly important discipline to practice. So I think just knowing that as a concept is important in the governance conversation. And so when it's time to change, when is the time to step away? Part of that consideration is going to be what type of governance structure we should move towards. And so we're just going to move to the next slide, which depicts in very simple terms a few different options around governance. The one on the far right is really when you've got a small business and essentially the founder, owner and small team, they're wearing many hats. So you've got owner, they're doing operations, and they're also a governor. The one in the middle is kind of your standard mainstream, hierarchical board executive operations. And the other one, which I think probably better reflects, that connectedness for te ao Māori, kaupapa tuku iho, and so is kind of that connected, where we see different pukinga, different skills, but it's presented in a circular way because it's part of that connectedness. And so when we move to a formal arrangement, it will create a whole new set of working relationships, which are central to the smooth operation of the organisation. And drawing on the wisdom of the tipuna, I've also been, recognised that the process of wānanga is really the idea of the exploration of what we should be doing when we're considering these types of structures, that discipline to explore deeply with others what a structure could look like, and that would include the values that underpin it, how those values are expressed, and actually the connections between the stakeholders. And that's why the one on the left I think is the more powerful and dynamic, because it shows that connectedness. And that's what I think Māori governance approaches does. It distinguishes us from mainstream because it is more dynamic and highly connected. He kaupapa tuku iho, caring for and nurturing our treasures handed down from our ancestors. It plays a crucial role in guiding us alongside tikanga, how we do things properly. And the other important thing is kaitiaki. So we understand our responsibilities not only for this generation but for our mokopuna. And I think it's important to highlight, because there are lots of different decision-making frameworks, and some of you may have come across this in your reading. There is obviously greater visibility around sustainability and ESG. So for those of you who don't know that acronym, environment, social and governance, it's it's a framework that exists very much in the investment management space, and it's become very much mainstream. It's been around for probably a few decades now globally, and it's become highly topical because one of the parts of that G part is really speaking to corporate governance and this emerging thinking really around the fact that managers need to remember ultimately who they work for. And what we can demonstrate with kaupapa tuku iho values embedded and applied in our frameworks is that we are able to potentially overcome, if we do apply them, overcome weaker stewardship that comes from a disconnect between the owners and those those whānau who we are serving. So yeah, I really think that the model on the left really helps us to explore in a uniquely Māori way how we deal with complex issues like conflict of interest, like transparency. Some of the things I've observed across the 3 different models, which I've already referenced really, but is such an important thing in governance, and it is around alignment. If we don't get that alignment right, it means that things can really become quite difficult. It really is the glue that holds things together when things would otherwise fall apart, because you can have all the accountability and compliance measures in place, and they are part of good governance, but without that alignment of purpose and vision, the governance outcomes can be poor. So just moving to the next slide, I'm going to take us actually back to the question around what is governance. So what we've seen kind of a few different approaches to governance. There is no single definition, but I think a key ingredient to the question of governance is leadership, and it's not just a single leader. It's a team of leaders heading in the same direction. And I love that in traditional times, there were ways that we defined what good governance looks like. The 2 closely connected concepts of rangatiratanga and kaitiakitanga. I mean, I think they are a beautiful illustration of what leadership looks like. The idea of a rangatira weaving people together and kaitiakitanga taking care of resources and people. That was the skills matrix of the day. And as I understand it, leaders were carefully chosen through observation of the skills they exhibited. And if we look at the word governance, the origin of the word governance, the Latin word gubernere, I mean, it's referring to navigating a ship. So someone able to lead others to get to a destination. So taking this metaphor of a journey, we've identified some things today, and they're kind of on the right there. But the key points, probably setting time aside for governance, conducting regular reviews, doing the basics well, holding each other to account, building our capability, having robust decision-making processes, being investment ready, exploring alternative frameworks, keeping an eye on emerging trends. And then the last one, aligning purpose and value, reconnecting with purpose, carefully selecting our governors, setting the tone, and building a network of trusted partners. Now, not all of those are on those slides. I've updated it slightly since I prepared this, and I will be setting an update. And I have, so, you know, we've kind of gone full circle in terms of what is governance. So hopefully we've got a good idea of what that looks like. The next slide is really a kete of resources on hopefully that you'll be able to help you on your haerenga journey. And one of the things that is really important, and it goes back to Te Ao Tawharetoa, you know, when our people chose their leaders carefully, the selection of governors is so important. But the other part of that is equipping ourselves with the skills that we need to set us up for success. So to help do this, I've just, as I said, pulled together some resources, and there's some really wonderful resources out there, and I've kind of pitched it across a range. So there's community resources, there's Māori resources, there's a range of resources, and I've actually got some to update later, so I'll update that pack. But I really would encourage you, because a lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to pull together, whether it's templates that just help you, you know, if you don't have those, or whether you want to see, you know, a video clip of someone that's talking about some issues. All of that is available, and so, you know, that's there for you to take away. And I really think it is worth your time to spend on that, because that, even though we're time poor, this is an investment, and so it's really worth your while. The other thing is building capability, and we know that governance, there are some courses out there and they can be expensive, but there are funding agencies out there who can assist. And if you're interested in my role at Wellington, New Zealand, part of what we do is to support Pakihi Māori, and part of that is helping to, businesses, Pakihi Māori, and beyond actually, to understand what's out there and what's available. So I've just got a kind of a point around those of you who might be aspiring to be governors. I talked a little bit about my haringa, my registration at the Ministry of Women, but I would urge you to do your homework. It's like the due diligence you're going to do on whose board you're going to join. You absolutely need to know what their values are, who the people are, because going back to that opening comment, when you have an ability, you have a responsibility, and that does include personal liability. And it doesn't make sense to not do your homework. So I wish you well on your haringa. It's not for the faint-hearted, and whether you're chosen or not, I wanted to just reflect on the change in my journey. So if you remember if you have an ability, you have a responsibility. But through this governance haringa, where I've been so privileged to have access to whānau, to thought leaders, to a whole range of other people, the thing that best reflects my governance haringa now is the whakatauki, mā te kimi, ka kite, mā te kite, ka mōhio, mā te mōhio, ka marama, seek and discover and know and become enlightened. And so I know the next part is to hand over, but before doing so, I just want to extend a huge mihi to you all, because I know you're very busy and time poor to join this governance kōrero. Kia ora koutou.
Tēnā koe Toni e tuahine, na mihi nui ki a koe mō te toha I tō whakaro me mātauranga, tēnā koe. Thank you, Toni. Thank you for sharing, your knowledge, your wisdom, and your experiences around governance. As you mentioned up front, it's an interesting and perplexing topic, and so we thank you for your courage to speak on this this important kaupapa. You've covered some really important aspects of governance in terms of what it is and why it's important. And I guess we're just extremely grateful for how generous you've been with your time, not only in the lead up, but also today in terms of the time you've committed to share this with us. Kia ora tātou, greetings everybody. Ka mihi aroa ki a koutou katoa, ko David Harrison tōku ingoa no Rotorua hau. Born and raised in Rotorua, I now live in Tamaki. I've been at ANZ for close to 20 years, and I've spent sort of more than half of that working with Pakihi Māori. Many of those are, kind of larger businesses with boards, but I've also had the pleasure of working with business owners as well as Māori startups. I've got some questions for Toni, and I'm sure others do too, and I've seen a few in the chat there. But if you do have them, please pop them in, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. To kick things off, though, Toni, going back to, I guess, some of those sort of smaller businesses, from our perspective as a banker, when we're assessing any business as a potential borrower, we're wanting to understand their strategy. We're wanting to understand and get comfort around a business's ability to execute on their plans. And, we see governance as a really important part, whether it's formal or informal, a really important aspect of whether a business is going to be successful or not. So I'm thinking about those smaller businesses. Are there any kind of initial steps that you think, startups or small businesses should be taking to just begin their governance practices?
Ngā mihi. Yeah, I mean, definitely. People are probably familiar with the idea of a lean canvas, but there are some canvases out there that are, more appropriate for, Māori frameworks, for example, if you want to embed some of your kaupapa Māori. But really, the idea of sitting down and actually working out your purpose, your moi moia, that really is a powerful and important place to start, and being able to articulate that. So it's that elevator pitch. So, I'm thinking about a couple of businesses that I know, and they really spent a huge amount of time and energy pulling together the why reflecting that, and then being able to present that and refine that. And so when that happens, and so sometimes small businesses may or may not have the expertise to do that, then reaching out. And so there is, for example, management capability funding or other funding that could be available where you go out and access the advice and support that you need to do that. Because if you don't have that in-house, then I think creating, those connections, or also tūhono, so networks, Māori networks, for example, or business networks more widely, actually just being really expansive in terms of thinking about where you might be able to absorb a whole range of knowledge, because there are different ways of doing things, and so you can get probably a little bit lost. And so that navigation piece, so it's definitely a combination of building your trusted partners and your connections, making connections, and some of those government sites that I've got and will share provide good ways of accessing those, and really thinking about how can you do your elevator pitch. It's that pitch around your moimoia, your vision, so that when you go and meet, you're fully prepared and can confidently convey that message to whomever you're meeting with.
Papai, and I like your comment around making sure that you're investment ready. That's a great mindset for any business to think about. Thank you for all those links and tools that you put together, and we'll make sure that people can get access to those. Just thinking about individuals now, so there's people have asked some of these questions in the chat in the lead up to this, but around if you're an individual wanting to aspire to be in governance roles like yourselves, what's some of the things that they can be doing to prepare themselves to move into governance positions at some point in the future?
I mean, I'd probably best to speak from my own personal experience. So I really pushed myself out there in terms of networking. So I identified, I probably signed up to a few different networks. Women in Super was actually the one that I joined when I got that inspirational kōrero, that wero, and signed up to some registry. So the Ministry of Women have so Puni Kōkiri have a registry for aspiring governors. And it really is but it's really putting yourself out there. It's really, and it can be deeply uncomfortable because you're often turning up to events where you don't know anyone, and then signing up to some of those membership groups. I belong to a few different organisations, Māori governance, Māori women governance, kind of groups, and just finding connections to that. But really, it's a full court press, if you like. You're basically thinking about all the different places where you're likely to collide with or meet with people. And then the other really important thing is finding people, role models. So as I mentioned Rachel Selby and I mentioned Debbie Birch, finding someone that aligns and potentially just exploring what they've done, and if you're lucky enough to access a mentor or someone to reach out, because a lot of these people, while very time poor, are very generous. But yeah, I'd say it's an full court press, going out there, putting yourself out there, and again, I think most people will, if you're persistent and they keep seeing you, then that may well pay off.
Kia ora. Thank you for that, Toni. You've mentioned a couple of people there that you've really admired, and you talked about they had this a trait around upholding the mana of others, and I was interested if you could expand on that in terms of what other skills or traits some of these great governors that you've worked with have had that you've admired or that you've looked to try and emulate yourself. Could you expand on that a little?
Absolutely. So one of the things, and again, when I was first thinking about this presentation, I was saying it could potentially be quite a dull or dry subject, because a lot of the housekeeping, so having your whare in order, having that strong base of process policy is so foundational. And so people that do that really well, I think, are perhaps not necessarily recognised for that. So I look to that and I see that, going in to an organisation and knowing what needs to be fixed, for example, and then being very deliberate and tactical, and then bringing in the right. So the other thing is that the people that I've been fortunate to work closely with have it's almost like a talent scouting skill, where they know how to fill those gaps. So the skills gap is another key piece. understanding. So it's a common, so in leadership, when we think about it, bringing together, but it's the ability to identify talent, to nurture talent, to bring in the people we needed, to support them. And then, so I've been lucky in that, you know, I've moved into, you know, a role chairing, for example, of subcommittees. And that's not, and it's an uncomfortable space to be, but with support. So I think generally what I've seen as the role models are those ones that can think strategically, but understand also the things that need to be done and the right people to execute on that and to lead well.
Which comes back to your point around rangatira and that ability to weave people together. So that's nice lead into my next question, which was going to be about tikanga, which you mentioned a couple of times. And, you know, I guess as we've headed further into the business world, do you think tikanga has been, or aspects of tikanga have been lost along the way? And are there things you think that we should be reminding ourselves to make sure that we're rekindling and incorporating in our governance positions?
Yeah, so I absolutely total with that sentiment. As a tauira, i te reo Māori me ona tikanga, so I'm on a constant journey, and I'm so fortunate to be able to, you know, with my whānau, the very many generous people I know, you know, you will get things wrong, right? So that's that. So, but tikanga does adapt, so hopefully, you know, there's that part as well. But I think what we need to do more of, because I think very much there's a conceptual piece, and it's been able to take something and apply it. And we need to leverage our experts. So again, it's that bringing in the expertise we needed. So who are those people to help guide us, show us what that looks like? And that's why I always go back to, because when I was at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa doing He Papa Tikanga, one of the most beautiful, we got many amazing puka, but one of them was The Woven Universe by Māori Marsden. And it does talk about wānanga and the process of acquisition of knowledge and all of that. So if we know that those concepts, we apply them in the context of governance, and that may well evolve because of it, then that's important. But not all of us know this. So this is new learning for me since Dad passed away. So it's, I think, for those who do have the matauranga, who do have the knowledge, being able to access that is really important, and for people to be open to that and value that.
Kia ora. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Thank you, Toni, for adding that extra kind of colour around those questions. Thank you very much. I'm just going to pass back to Mal now to see if there's any questions they want to share from the chat group. But again, just from me, Toni, ngā mihi nui ki a koe. Thank you very much for your time and your contribution. Mel.
Kia ora, David. Kia ora, Toni. Just before we go through the audience questions, which is fantastic, I can see there is plenty going through. I'm just going to go through some support we have for you and other webinars. And while I do that, I'm just going to put up a poll because we really love your feedback on these webinars. So I'll just bring that up where you can continue putting your chat in the boxes. It'll just be on screen for a few seconds, and if we could fill that in would be great. Why give you time for that? So not only do we support you with these free webinars, but we also have a wealth of information on our website. The Biz Hub is a great place to start, whether you're starting or growing your business or running it. There's a wealth of resources there available to you, as well as further webinars. We do have some exciting couple of webinars for Māori and business coming up later in the year. We do have our digital one around digital resources next week, as well as some recordings for you. As well as that, you can look on there for the webinars as we've talked about today. So the webinars are on the range of topics that are available to you. So we have them on startup and planning, finance and risk, growth and leadership, insights for business. So we recently did our food and beverage one, and one with Girl Boss. So you can jump in and complete that and watch those recordings at a later date. As on today's series, there's our Māori and Business series. The recording for today's session will be up in the next week or two, available to you to do that. The recordings are all there, and as I said, it's on the anz.co.nz Biz Workshop page. Now, we'll just jump into those other questions. I've just got one more question that I'll drop up there for you all to answer, and please do, you can fill them in the chat, as we'd love to hear that. So I'll just go through the chat now for those questions for you. Just bring that up, just bear with me, and we can go through those for you. Right, so we'll just get through the chat. Give me 2 seconds with the polls on my... Okay. All right, just bringing up all the chats with them. What is sustainable banking that addresses their environmental issues?
What I can say just around that te taio and sustainability, so I think there's a far greater awareness of these issues. There's lots of resources out there. I was just actually looking at someone the other day for businesses, for example, where you can go in, I think it's biz.gov, where you can go in and actually assess your own suitability if you're looking to. But if it's in relation to the banks, I probably think that's better answered by David.
Yeah, no worries at all. Absolutely, sustainability is in an environment. I mean, sustainability is more than just the environment. There's also kind of social and cultural considerations as well. But in terms of the question around the environment, the banking industry is really looking to reward customers that are helping to improve their emission or lower their emissions, to reduce their carbon footprint, to make better use of water, reduce waste, and a whole range of areas. So there's certainly new financing products that are being developed that are helping reward customers for that in terms of providing cheaper funding for sustainable purposes. So I encourage you to look on that. You'll find some of our sustainable finance information online.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So just noting the focus on excellence in governance, does diversity help with effective governance, Toni?
Absolutely. Tautoko. I think it speaks for itself. I think we know just diversity of thinking, and I've seen it in action. So yeah, I think yes, absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic. How do we balance the ground home kianga, sorry for my pronunciation, people and professionals that don't sometimes live in the rohi or growing up in the whenua? This sometimes can cause conflict.
So this is those who didn't grow up on the whenua, is that?
That's the way I read it. They don't live there or haven't grown up there.
Well, I can speak to that because that was exactly our upbringing. So we were very disconnected, which is why when Dad passed away 8 years ago, that was that reclamation. So it's hard. It's hard because that acquisition of all the beautiful matauranga that we have is not easy. But I think once you're on that journey, and I'm a true believer, like our tipuna are guiding us, so that once you start on that, then the support will come. But you have to be committed in your intention. And yes, so so what I guess possibly one thing that I should just talk a little bit about very quickly is te ture whenua. So I had no idea until I went to Te Puni Kōkiri that there were all these legislative requirements around whether it's ahu whenua, Māori authorities, and that was quite staggering to me for someone who has been involved in banking and compliance, where we have screeds of legislation. So that understanding is why so we need to. So when we talk about the complexity of the Māori economy and the ecosystem, you're not alone in having limited knowledge. I mean, there are some people who have deep knowledge, but there are others. And so one of the widows that I wanted to kind of give to the financial services industry is that every time we go into a bank and we have to deal with anti-money laundering for if it's a charitable trust, if it's a Māori reservation, I'm often having to educate them because they don't have the matauranga to answer questions that I already know the answers for. So it's absolutely fair and reasonable that a lot of us are learning. There's a lot to learn, but we also need to hold others to account to learn also, because it's not just us.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Toni. David, I'll put this to you, and then Toni, if there's something you want to add as well. Where can business owners locate effective virtual tools and resources to support the setup of their governance structures?
Yeah, I think we're quite fortunate that Toni's done the hard work there, and she's put together a kete there, which is part of this presentation. So we'll be to pass that round. I guess governance is such a broad topic. So I mean, I know there are resources that we have online around building an effective business plan. Those are all kind of key elements of governance. So yeah, probably you could from an ANZ perspective you could start there, but I think also Toni's list is much broader and covers a range of agencies.
Yeah, awesome. Anything else to add, Toni? We'll keep going with the questions.
Yeah, not much. Yeah, not much else to add. I've just got a few updates that I need to make to you later for some additions to that.
Cool. Thank you. So the recording will be available on the website with these slides for you to refer to later. So for any of those questions, plenty of thank you. So we appreciate that. This is a really good one, and I know you've touched a little bit on it, Toni, and the comments your husband has made along your journey. But this question is, please share how you achieve work-life balance with your dedication to governance excellence.
Yeah, it's hard. I was thinking basically if consecutive weekends, like how many weekends do I actually have off? It's kind of that question, or do I have enough time to go on a holiday? So I don't know if that's a good answer. I'm managing it carefully. And so I just have to make sure that I set enough time aside for whānau and friends. But I usually get I've got frank enough whānau for them to tell me that I'm spending too much time. But the other thing is when I look at, again, our whānau, our tipuna, and how hard they work, I mean, I kind of look at what we're doing and I go, but it's a hard thing to balance. I think the main thing is just keeping your hauora centered. So every day, I think, Mel, just to share, every day I do in my karakia, I do a cold plunge, ki roto i te puna, and that's my centering. So find ways to manage your well-being.
Yeah, it's very, very important and great point. We're probably got time for maybe one or two more questions, but I really this is a great one. Is there a list of Māori mentors that are able to assist new governors? Toni, do you know? Or yeah,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, not sure, but I'm sure that, I think mentors, I know from experience, sometimes it's sort of your smaller groups that you're in. So I'm sure if you ask your marae or your whānau, I'm sure that there'd be recommendations within your connections out there. I think it's sometimes just putting it out there that you do want a mentor, and then setting clear expectations with the mentor, what you both want out of that relationship. So it helps really get the best out of that. Anything there from you, David?
Yeah, I was going to say, Toni put it really well earlier on when she talked about the importance of building networks and being courageous and putting yourself out there. And that's how you generally find mentors, is you go and do your background, you find people that inspire you, and then you be brave enough to go and ask them for help. So I think that was sage advice from Toni earlier.
Cool. Thank you. We've got one last question. How can we be more persuasive in the boardroom to encourage robust decision making around the necessities for policies, procedures, and finances with governors that can sometimes be overlooked with strategic decisions? Toni, do you want to wrap that one up? And that could be our last question.
One again, I don't know if this is just good fortune. All of the boards that I'm trying to think of any board that kind of understood that was important. I think that when things go wrong, I mean, if you're pointing the obvious thing, and a lot of the governance training material you'll find, you can refer to case law, for example, or like things that have gone badly. I mean, one example for Te Ao Māori, if you go to the Māori Land Court decisions, it's pretty grim reading, but it gives you an idea of what can happen if things aren't well managed. So it's that kind of thing. I mean, you have to be careful though, because it's not about putting the fear into people because of the personal liability, but it's definitely what can go wrong. Just being practical. Like, I think this is where having connections and stories that you can share that where they're people that and I think we actually that's one thing, is that we need to be better at sharing those stories and there being a safe place to share those stories, and that's I think something that we should encourage, and just make it clear that that's under the safety of not to be taken as it's given, but it's I think we need to have more courageous conversations around those things.
Right. Thank you so much, Toni. Thank you, David. Thank you, the audience, for all the wonderful questions. I am going to hand to Carleen to close off the session today. Thank you so much for everyone for your feedback and being here and taking time out of your businesses to be with us all today. Carleen, would you like to close off the session, please?
Tēnā koutou katoa. I hope that you've really enjoyed the kōrero today. Definitely a beautiful way for us to consider Māori governance. E te tuakana e tauni he mihi kauana ki a koe. Ki a koe te mokopono o Ngāti Raukawa o Ngāti Tūwharetoa, he mihi tēnei ki a koe. I just really want to acknowledge you, Toni, in your journey of governance, your journey of reclamation, he mihi tēnei ki a koe te tuakana. I also want to acknowledge David for facilitating the conversations and the questions. And of course, we appreciate there will be many more questions for us as we all engage in our own respective journeys in Māori governance. Also, at this time, I think it's a really nice time as our whānau went up to Te Koro o Ruapehu to acknowledge the arrival of Puanga. My whānau in Te Taisoke Rau over Waitangi saw Matariki glistening in the early morning over the wonderful moana at Waitangi. And that we are coming into this time of Matariki, a time where we reflect, we consider where we are and appreciate our time of today, but equally of what our future will be for us in the next year ahead. With that whānau, thank you so much for being with us today. O tēnei anō he mihi nui rawa atu mai te pēkenui o ANC kia koutou. I roto I tēnei anō te kaupapa te kōrero o tēnei anō te kai o te rangatira te kōrero. Kia kōrero tahi, kia kōrero tātou. I roto I tēnei anō te kaupapa. Māori governance, kia puawai te Pakihi. Tēnā koutou, a tēnā no tātou katoa. To you, Mel, thank you so much for being with us. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.